Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Today is Tuesday, November 23rd, 2021. On the eve of Thanksgiving, I announced before we started the broadcast this evening that I wouldn't be doing the planned broadcast this evening, that we're going to postpone that for a little bit, and I'll come back to you with that. So I apologize for those of you that are tuning in live if you were expecting that broadcast. So tonight's a format that I've actually never used, where I'm just going to present on the things that I've been thinking about lately. It's kind of like a question and answer, with the difference being that I'm the one asking the questions as well as offering the answers. And so I went back to the things that I'm writing. I'm working on a third book right now, which shouldn't be too long. We feel like we're getting really close to the end. But also the things that are relevant for this holiday season, the things that are coming up in my mind. So I'm going to be talking about 3 separate topics this evening, and then I'll open it up for questions and answers as we go along. And the first question that I wanted to talk about tonight is Thanksgiving. Specifically around the idea of gathering as a family, triggers that can happen, but also the idea of gratitude in Thanksgiving. I think one of the challenges that I get presented with when I think about Thanksgiving, when clients share with me, is that it's not as joyful for everybody as it ought to be, that there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of shoulds that come into it. And I think that adds to, I don't think that's the only reason, but I think that adds to the stress and the triggering that happens. Holidays, events where we celebrate a milestone or the passing of another trip around the sun, are what I refer to as elevator days. They tend to bring us back to, because they connect to our past, they bring us back to lower levels of functioning. In therapy, we call that regression. And I don't think I know it's talked about in clinical settings, we talk about regression, but I don't think the average person thinks about regression. And I think there's a way to talk about it that can invite a deeper level of compassion for yourself. And know this, that when you celebrate these kinds of holidays, when you gather with family, it is incredibly common to be pulled back into a lower level of functioning. The guru Ramdas said, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. And Ramdas was one of those folks, if you don't know him, that everybody would associate with being grounded, being enlightened, being at peace, being without conflict, or at least having very few triggers at all. So if Ramdas can speak to that idea that going back to family, spending time with family is triggering, then we can all be comforted to know that that's a typical response. So you go back to old relationships, you go back to old celebrations that remind you of the past, and don't be surprised if you start acting like a 16-year-old. Now, if you're a 16-year-old, that's not going to be a surprise to you at all. But if you're 26 or 36 or 46 or 56, don't be surprised if you feel like you're 16 again, or if you're put back in those roles. I share the idea very often that having a spouse or a partner can highlight this experience, that they can, because it's not their same system, it's not the system they grew up in, that they can more easily and clearly see our regression. You know, my wife and I have noticed this in each other, that we watch each other around our families of origin, and my wife can say, Brad, you don't even seem like yourself. You're much more raw. You seem to be triggered more, seem to be reactive more. And the level of functioning that you're normally operating at isn't present when your family is present. And I can see the same thing with her. That is normal. Psychology teaches us that when we revisit old thoughts, people, playgrounds, places, that it can trigger us or pull us back into an old role, an old way of operating. And that the relationships do the same thing. You know, I think about it today. I was talking about my younger brother with somebody. I was talking about him with great affection today. And I referred to him as a kid. What an amazing kid he is. My younger brother, referring to him as a kid, he's 51 years old. But still in my mind, he's my little brother and my big brother. I started off thinking about my big brother. My big brother, while he's 4 years older than me, 4.5 years older than me, So he's in his late 50s, and I'm in I'm 53. We're really close in age, but there still is that role. There still is that energy. So Thanksgiving is like all of the holidays this time of year can be very regressive. And so the first idea is to be kind to yourself, to sit and to watch yourself, to observe yourself in these relationships. That's my first point about Thanksgiving. My second point is the attitude or idea around Thanksgiving or gratitude. For me, the idea to be told to practice gratitude is very triggering. It goes back to growing up in a family, in a life where there were right and wrong feelings to have. I was told when I should feel angry. I even remember going to my very first therapy session as a married person, and I had some anger, as you're likely to have in marriage and in relationships. And the therapist asked me after the first session, can you imagine being not angry? And I said, I suppose I could. I don't know the value in that, but I suppose I could. And then she said, I'd like you to write an assignment and bring it back next week for all the things you're grateful for in your marriage. And it felt so dismissive. I thought, and I to this day, of course, know it, that there's a way through my anger that can be healing, that I don't need to dismiss it or put it aside, that it's telling me or teaching me something. It could have been informative to the relationship at the time, but the therapist saw it as a threat. Maybe she sensed that my wife saw it as a threat, and so she wanted me not to feel what I was feeling. So the problem with the idea of suggesting or even imposing the idea that people practice gratitude, for me, can be very triggering, because it reminds me of times in my life where I was told what I should feel. I think Thanksgiving, for me, just for me, is often the outcome of mindfulness. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh says that the first thing that we think about when we get a toothache is how we have taken for granted the non-toothache. So for those of you that don't have a toothache today, we could take a moment. I could ask you to run your tongue all across the backs of all of your teeth. I could tell you to clench your jaw and to open it, to rub your lips across the front of your front teeth. And I could remind you, for those of you that don't have a toothache, that your teeth are fine today. And you can take a moment in that moment to be grateful for the non-toothache. But if you're going through stress, whether it be at work, in your relationships, some of you have a child in treatment. And so there's going to be a hole in your heart. There's going to be an empty space at the table because the family is making a sacrifice for this person to be away for a time to get some healing and some work done. And so if that's where your energy is, if that's what you're feeling at the moment, and I tell you to practice gratitude or thankfulness, I'm actually telling you to feel something other than what you're feeling. So for me, gratitude is the outcome of mindfulness. That my gratitude, in somewhere around 10 or 12 years ago, when I started to make the shift from thinking about things in terms of the right way to feel, the right way to do things. I say started this shift. It's not complete. I'll let you know when I've completed it, if ever that should happen. But I started the shift away from the what should be, what I should be feeling, what I should be thinking, what should be going on inside, to what is going on. It started to build my gratitude more profoundly. I've shared the story that I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2015, November, December of 2015. And after a period of adjustment that involved some very sad feelings, some really powerful grief, and even, I might say, some depression. Allowing myself to go through that led to this experience of feeling grateful for what I do have. I remember sitting in a mindfulness activity out in the wilderness during one of our finding U's. Our early finding U's were all outside, out in the wilderness. and we were practicing mindfulness, and my feet were cold because it was a fall day. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad that I can feel my feet, the coldness. I generally hate coldness. I grew up in Southern California, and I loved not having seasons growing up. And so coldness living in Utah was always a challenge for me. So I'm sitting in this circle. We're doing a mindfulness exercise, and my feet started to feel colder. I started to notice them feeling cold as I was paying attention to my body. And without being instructed, I remember thinking, I'm so grateful that I can feel the cold, because my main symptom with multiple sclerosis is numbness, specifically numbness in my extremities, in my feet and my hands, neuropathy. So it wasn't that I had to practice it. It wasn't that I was told to practice it. It wasn't that I was told that's the right or the good thing or the enlightened thing or the therapeutically healthy thing to do. I felt everything. I went through the feelings that I had from the diagnosis that I would imagine most people have some version of those. And then sitting on the ground on a cold fall morning, sitting with a group of participants, courageous participants, guiding them through a mindfulness exercise. I first went through the cold in my toes, which I don't like, and then came automatically that gratitude that I could still feel. And I think about that every day. My multiple sclerosis, there are moments when it flares up and it can be trying, and I can go back into those other feelings I described. But mostly day to day, it's helped me to become more grateful, more mindful of what I do have, because to date, generally speaking, multiple sclerosis doesn't reverse. It can be halted. There are cases where it can reverse, but most people's experience is that it doesn't reverse, but that it can be halted. Excuse me. It can be paused. And so whatever I'm feeling today, sensations I have today, excuse me, whatever sensations that I have today, it's only going to get worse from here. And so most of the time I feel grateful for my body, grateful for what it's giving me. And I would not have predicted, maybe you would, I would not have predicted that my MS diagnosis and finding out that I had it would lead to a greater sense of gratitude. So for me, and I'm just offering that for those of you where it might fit, and I've had many people share with me a similar experience. Instead of asking people to practice or encouraging people to practice a certain feeling that we deem as a good or a healthy feeling, we can encourage people to feel everything. I remember I had a psychologist friend of mine, and I live in Utah, so you're not going to be surprised to hear a story about Mormon missionaries. The Mormon missionaries knocked on his door and they asked him, do you want to learn how to feel more happiness? And he said, I think he was being a little bit sarcastic, but he was also being honest. He said, I want to learn how to feel all of my feelings. And I love that idea. I love that shift in perspective. So I wrote this week. This was part of my thinking this week. Gratitude is a mindfulness practice. And telling someone to be grateful can be triggering when they are struggling or otherwise in distress. This holiday season, consider switching the question from what are you grateful for to what are you feeling? I might encourage you, if you have a practice at the Thanksgiving table, to shift the practice from asking the question, what are you grateful for, to asking people to be present in their bodies, in their day, with themselves, and to share whatever comes up for them. That might be too tall of an order for a lot of families, because a lot of people can be activated and triggered by people having upset feelings, but it's just an idea, and at least it's a shift. I wrote a blog a couple of years ago as the holiday season was approaching in 2018, I believe it was, about this. The name of the blog was, I referred to it the other night, about why you shouldn't come home for Thanksgiving. And I wanted to read to you the closing paragraph. Again, as a different way to think about gratitude, Thanksgiving, the holidays, going home, being triggered by families. And this is how I concluded the blog. I wrote, so we go home if it welcomes us, all of us, or we go home if we want to see our family with new eyes. We go home and come into contact with a younger version of ourselves. That's the regression I was talking about. We go home to celebrate or remember, or we go home because we think it's the right thing to do and guilt prevents us from staying away. In the end, I hope that if you go home or if you gather, that you find that you, all of you, is welcome. And if you need therapeutic permission not to go home and instead spend your holiday with others who love and value you, consider this your doctor's note. In the end, as a therapist, I invite you to explore all of your feelings, and perhaps this may also allow some gratitude to come through on a day in which we are often told what we must feel. As you know, this work is about shifting our level of consciousness. It's about thinking about things differently. It's about, in many ways, unlearning things that we have taught. And that really brings me to my next thought that I've been thinking about. Some of the things I've mentioned in some previous broadcasts, but like I said, when we decided to change the topic this evening, it was an opportunity to do something a little bit different tonight. This quote came across my social media feed a few weeks ago. It's written by Baba Ramdas, a wonderfully beautiful teacher, guru, who passed away, I think late 2019, might have been 18. But he wrote this. He said, a lot of people try to counteract the I am not good enough with I am good enough. In other words, they take the opposite of what they take the opposite and they try to invest it. That still keeps the world at a level of polarities. The art is to go behind the polarities. So the act is not to go to the world of I am good to counteract I am bad, or I am lovable as opposed to I am unlovable, but to go to behind it to I am. I am. And I am includes the fact that I do crappy things and I do beautiful things, and I am. That includes everything that I am. So much of the work of therapy is an invitation into a different level of consciousness. Part of these podcasts and the repetitive nature of these podcasts is to talk about a different way of being, a different kind of sensibility. The other day, somebody shared with me that in some forum where there were a lot of my podcast listeners, that somebody had set a boundary, and everybody was encouraging them in their boundary setting. And even one or two may have mentioned my name and said, Brad would be proud of you for setting your boundary. But the fact of the matter is, I'd be proud of you no matter what. I'd be proud of you in your struggle. That's why the idea of being proud of you doesn't work very much, because I can't not be proud of you if you're struggling, if you're trying. At least if I'm having a good day and I have my capacity and my wits about me. And that part of the work in therapy, what I'm trying to facilitate, not just for the children, for your children, but I'm trying to facilitate the uncovering of who you are. And that's a sloppy, messy, crooked path. And so as I work with clients, any client of any age, I try to celebrate the mistakes. And if anything, I don't praise people for what they do, but I pay attention to why they do it. If it's something you feel like you need to do, give it a try. This life is an experiment. And the experiment is designed, in my opinion, at discovering who you really are, your most authentic self. And for most of us, that authentic self was lost a long time ago in childhood because of the pressures to be something, to retain the love of our parents and our other caregivers. So we gave up who we are and we became who we should be. So what Ramdas is teaching here is the opposite of I am good and I am bad is I am. And so that you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness. Therapy, I wrote, is an invitation to a deeper level of consciousness, because on the current plane of consciousness, the behavior makes no sense. Somebody else wrote this. Alan Watts, the great Buddhist teacher, wrote this. He said, Problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way. So if you keep asking yourself the question, it's because you're asking the wrong question. And in The Journey of the Rogue Parent, my first book, the way I made that, highlighted that, is the question is not what should I do? If you came to me as a client, you said, Brad, should I set boundary X, Y, or Z? I wouldn't answer it. I can't answer it. But I would take you through a thought process to discover what was going on for you. I would work with you to help you heal any trauma that you might have that's unhealed or unexplored. And out of that new awareness, you would make a decision. And the decision would be the right one because it's yours. So what Alan Watts is telling us, what Einstein is telling us when he says you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness, what I'm trying to explain, what Ramdas is trying to explain, is we have to think differently. I wrote that, the outcome of therapy is realizing that you're a disaster and a miracle all at the same time. And self-esteem doesn't come from convincing yourself that you're great. I won't tell you that you're a great parent. I won't tell you that you're a bad parent either. You're just a human parent. And learning to embrace all of you, the I am, as Ram Dass says, that's where the healing happens. In our movies, we learn, you'll recognize this in the movies that you watch, the stories that you read. We learn that the heroes aren't all bad and that the villains aren't all, the heroes aren't all good and the villains aren't all bad. The protagonist oftentimes is a very human character. And what happens in the end is integration, wholeness, authenticity, being who they are. In our families, sometimes that was not okay because it was so triggering for my parents. A crying infant was something to be fixed, a problem to be solved. An angry teenager is a problem to be solved. A sad or an anxious young adult is a problem to be solved. Not somebody to be seen and understood and held. We learn to sit with each other in our unsolvable problems, and that's the healing. The healing is sitting with somebody in their unsolvable problems. So if your child's in treatment, we'll work on them. We will work on keeping them safe, giving them skills, tools, and insights for sure. And in the meantime, and hereafter, we'll also help you develop a new level of awareness to understand how you're unconsciously participating in the cycle, how you're unconsciously reinforcing the issues that you want to see go away. Trying to control somebody's thoughts or feelings doesn't work. In fact, it's counterproductive. When I get the question, will my child ever forgive me? My answer often is, they will as soon as you don't need them to forgive you. Because if you need them to forgive you, it's still for you. It's still for your ego. So this kind of maybe a more practical way of thinking about this shift. I wrote this the other day. Instead of thinking of your symptom, drugs, alcohol, self-harm, workaholism, obsessing, whatever it is, just fill in the symptom. Instead of thinking of your symptom as the problem, think of it as the solution. You can think of it as the solution. Then you can ask yourself, what problem was it solving? That's a different level of consciousness. We learn to ask different questions in different ways, and the behavior makes sense at a different level of consciousness. Therapy is an invitation to a deeper level of consciousness, because on the current plane of consciousness, the behavior makes no sense. That's why you need therapists, one of the reasons. Because they're from outside of the system, right? There's something other. And they say things like, well, I don't think you have to make people happy at Thanksgiving, and I don't think you have to go home or should go home for Thanksgiving if you don't want to, or I don't think it's your job to make your parents proud of you, or I don't think it's your job to make your spouse happy. I don't think it's your spouse's job to make you happy. You start to hear other ideas, and you learn that your assigned position in the family isn't necessarily your assigned position in the universe. You learn that the ideas, the constructs, the context that you grew up in was not the truth. It was just one of an infinite number of contexts that you could have grown up in. So part of this, part of the healing, part of the joy, part of the love, part of the liberation, the freedom, the empowerment all comes as we shift our consciousness, as we think about things differently. Socrates said, I can't teach people anything except how to think. Einstein, that was his big thing. He loved curiosity and he loved teaching people how to critically think. I love teaching people how to critically think about their childhood. I make the joke, and it's true, that when somebody comes to me telling me that they had a good childhood, I tell them therapy can fix that. Because it's important to realize that you had a good childhood, a bad childhood, and everything in between. Some of it was worse, some of it was better than others. You have parents that were worse than some parents and better than others. You are worse than some parents and better than others. And when we start to as the wonderful poet Rumi says, when we leave the idea of right and wrong doing behind, that's where we find connection. That's where we find love. That's where we find non-judgment. That's where we find compassion and capacity for ourselves and for the people that we care about. The third topic, in the spirit of this, I love this. I have shared this. Some of these I've shared over the past few weeks because these are the things I've been thinking about. They've kind of made their way into my other podcasts, my other broadcasts, webinars, and the topics. I love this quote because it's just so provocative. Charles Bukowski says, "Don't fight your demons. Your demons are here to teach you lessons. Sit down with your demons and have a drink and a chat and learn their names and talk about the burns on their fingers and the scratches on their ankles. Some of them are very nice." It's the same with your children, with your spouse. When you look at their behavior that's problematic, that's quote unquote unhealthy, neurotic, symptomatic, pathological, choose the word. You can choose any word that you want. Stupid, ridiculous, immature, whatever it is. If we can shift our perspective to think about those behaviors as what are they expressing? What parts of the self are they giving voice to? It's like when I shared a few years ago, I was invited to a broadcast, a national broadcast on Thanksgiving with my publisher, Judith Regan. And I butchered the entire visit, my answer and everything, because I was anxious and I was trying to prove to everybody that I was worthy of being there, that I had something to offer, that I was valuable. And after the experience, I'd done such a poor job. I was beating myself up with the shame that I feel when things like that happen. And my therapist said something to me. She said, instead of just trying not to do it again, what if you leaned into it? What if you wrote about it? What if you explored it? And it shifted my whole perspective. I hate people that show up the way that I show up. I hate that about myself. And I viscerally shrunk in shame as I was describing the me version of me that showed up. Look at me. Look how cool I am. Look at what I know. I can't it's one of my darkest shadow parts. My most repressed unconscious. And she encouraged me to write about it, to think about it. So I wrote about it. And with writing about it came understanding. With writing about it came compassion. I hope with writing about it came some comfort to the people that might have read it. And so now, when I'm feeling scared, I'm not feeling valued or valuable or worthy, instead of simply going to the solution where I try to prove myself and show how cool I am to people, I can sit with that a little bit better because I learned from my therapist how to sit with it, to sit with my demons and to say, I know you're feeling scared. I know you want to tell stories about how cool you are, how clever you are, how you figured things out, all the wonderful things you have to say. I understand that. When you were a young child, your parents really did value your cleverness. Children were, they never said this, but children were seen and not heard growing up. And that the only way you could get any attention was to start to sound funny, to make jokes with the adult, to start to have adult conversations. And you're feeling that again right now. And you're okay. And I'll sit with you. Do you see the difference? And thinking about our mental health, our mental illness as something to solve, to fix, versus seeing it as something to listen to and to understand, to listen to our symptoms as messengers from the unconscious parts of ourselves that aren't getting their needs met, and to interpret them through that lens. That's what we do. That's what the journey of the heroic parent. I think that's why people like the journey of the heroic parent so much, is because they learn to start to see themselves and their children differently through this lens of unexpressed needs, unmet needs, to meet those parts of ourselves and of our children with compassion instead of anger and frustration and judgment. I can't tell you not to be scared or angry when your child is acting out. That's a silly idea. Again, it goes back to what I started off with, the Thanksgiving part of this tonight, telling you what to feel. But I can start to give you a perspective to see and listen to it in a different way, which will then cause you to have a different feeling. It won't terrify you so much. It won't even anger you so much. When a child tells you that you're a dirty, rotten parent, I can't tell you not to feel hurt by that if you do feel hurt. But what we can explore is how this child doesn't have the words to express the hurt. And that great gift that you can bring to the table as you do your work is a more solid sense of yourself. So you realize that it's not about you. Mental health, some people define mental health as the ability to realize that what people think about you is not about you. If they think you're great, it's not about you. If they think you're horrible, it's not about you. Yes, you can listen to people's feelings and thoughts and feedback, and you can kind of run it through your filter and ask yourself questions. But to be driven by it or triggered by it or reactive to it is to suggest, to endorse the idea that it's about you. It's the same thing that Don Miguel Ruiz talks about in the Four Agreements when he talks about don't take it personally. And he gives the example, even if somebody punches you in the face, it's not about you. And so as you progress, for those of you that are new, it will just start to feel differently. Not because I've told you, but because you're dusting off and uncovering something that was lost long ago, which is yourself, who you are. The third topic I wanted to visit on tonight was attachment. I read this quote the other day. If you want to see who rules over you, see who you're not allowed to criticize. In the book that I'm writing, I wrote this quote. This is from the new book. The new book is about a young man who grew up in the Mormon religion, who came out as gay in a small community with a father who was an icon in the Mormon church in Utah. And besides the fact that he felt the need, the requirement to hide his sexual orientation from everybody, partially even including himself, he came to realize, or at least not make it conscious. I wrote this. I said, the most dangerous and damaging secret children are asked to keep is the hurt and anger they feel towards their parents. That's an oversimplification, but it's a good place to start. At Evoke, we have a letter that we assign children to write to their parents. We call it the impact letter, where the child writes and says, mom and dad, mom or dad, stepmom, stepdad, grandpa, whoever's the primary caregiver, here's what you did, and here's how it hurt. Here's how I felt about what you did. And I've said to my therapist, it's, if there was only one assignment, and there are more than one, of course, but if there was only one assignment in treatment, that would be the assignment. Start off with the usual suspects and start talking about your hurt and your anger, and then help the parents develop the capacity to hear it without it threatening their ego. Help parents feel good enough about themselves, about their humanity, their fallibility, their imperfectness, their horrible, rotten self, if you will. Instill in them an experience where they start to feel good enough about themselves that they can hear the hurt and anger without feeling threatened, in a way, without even feeling criticized. Being able to take it in. That is the task in parenting, to take in the child's feelings and distress, to be able to metabolize it and to reflect back out a sense that the child is okay. My daughter said this to me the other night. I thought it was incredibly insightful. Some of you know Emma Reedy. She works for the intensive program and also as a coach. Emma said, one of the most loving things a parent can do is be willing to be cast as the villain in their child's story. As we grow and develop the I told a client today that they confronted is probably too strong a word. They shared a feeling with me about something I'd said previously. And I was on it. First of all, I thanked them for telling me. Honored what the courage that it takes to tell a therapist about some hurt feelings. And I admitted to this person, not proudly admitting it, but just admitting it. If you'd said that to me 15 years ago, it wouldn't have gone well. I would have turned and twisted things around to show you how you were wrong and I was right. It would have been subtle. It would have been clever. I would have made you feel guilty even for challenging me again on it, because I'm equipped to be able to weaponize my skills and my tools. But today I don't have that inclination. Today my inclination is to recognize that the most courageous thing a client can do in therapy is to tell the therapist the truth. And the reason that it's courageous is because you're taking the risk that the therapist is going to do to you exactly what I just described, which is probably what your parents did when you told them you were hurt, or your teachers or your grandparents or whomever. See, attachment research and theory shows us that parenting is kind of a one-way street in a particular way. And the one-way street is that it's your job to hold and contain the child, to hold space for their feelings. That is, to listen to them. To hold space or to contain them means that you can be present with them, that you can listen, that you can resonate with them, that you can empathize. That's what I mean by containing. That you put aside your triggers. And you put them aside because you've done enough work on them that they're not so activated. That's your work. Your work is to come here and get a stronger sense of yourself so that your children can show up as they are. And when they can show up as they are, they then can move through the feelings, the experiences that they need to move through to heal. And that a common way to think about emotional illness is when somebody is not allowed to feel and think what they feel and think, mostly feel, that they develop symptoms to communicate it, symptoms to express it. So if you are courageous enough to do this work, if you're courageous enough to look at your family of origin, your childhood critically, if you're courageous enough to explore your wounds, to understand that your limitations are contributing to the issues, and if you realize that doing that won't create a lack of accountability in your children, it will be modeling accountability. That if you can do that work, then you get to be a part of the beautiful healing of your child. And perhaps better than I could say it, maybe perhaps the most beautiful quote on the subject coming from Carl Rogers, the great master therapist. He says, when a person realizes he has been deeply hurt, his eyes moisten. I think in some real sense, he's weeping for joy. It is as though he were saying, thank God somebody heard me. Somebody knows what it's like to be me. So those are the things I was thinking about this week, lately, last month or so. And as we are a couple of ways a day from Thanksgiving, I hope that you get to be in a place where you're allowed to be yourself. Like I said, I hope that if somebody in your family is in distress or upset, that you have an inkling to let them be and feel what they're feeling. I hope you can develop the nuance, the subtlety to realize that someone can be angry and hurt at you for the way you treated them during childhood and also love you and want you in their life. And in my experience, the more allowed they are to be angry and hurt and to express it with you, they won't go anywhere. But you can't fake it. There are no shortcuts. Skills aren't going to do it. You have to make peace with your dragons. You have to unlearn things. You have to realize that the notions you were taught about right and wrong were nonsense. And that when Carl Jung, the great master therapist, said, I would rather be whole than good, he was expressing what it means to love, to have compassion. First for yourself, and then for your children, for your spouse that's struggling. At the end of the day, I hope that you and your family get to be who you are this holiday, this week. And I hope that you're able to welcome them and that others are able to welcome you in the process. And in that welcoming of who you are, I know there's healing. I know that you can move through it. Are there any questions that have come up? Somebody says this. When I listen to you speak of what it feels to be like to be a self, I think when I listen to you speak of what it feels like to be a self, I think that it is exactly what I want to finally be free and whole. Most importantly, I want this for my children. I am working hard to one day get there, but sometimes the pushback feels so great, and in turn, it feels unattainable. How do you move past this? If I am struggling with the threat of the pushback from my family and friends, how are my children going to manage, especially one that is already struggling with mental health and substance abuse disorders? In my experience, great question, by the way. In my experience, you have to have somebody. You have to have at least one person who sees you. For me, that's my therapist. Every Friday at 11 Mountain Time, unless I can't do it, for the past 22 years, I'm in Jamie Gill's office. Like Emma, my daughter said, and I wrote a couple of weeks ago, breaking free of family dysfunctions, of the pressures that you're describing, even in your current family, is going to trigger guilt. And so she said, I go to therapy so my therapist can help lighten the load and help me carry the guilt. You're going to have to face guilt. The great barrier to this work is your guilt and your shame. And so you need somebody, you need a Mr. Rogers in your life. It could be a mentor, could be a sponsor. In my life, it's a therapist. These podcasts, self-help books, be discerning about the self-help teachers that you listen to. When you start to hear shoulds in the self-help work, consider stepping away from that person. When your therapist thinks they know the answer to your specific question about what you should do, step away from that therapist. When a friend has advice, you can share with them how that doesn't work for you. You've got to find places, I think, my experience, you've got to find places where somebody is interested in finding you, not the right answer. That's how we heal. There is, I think, a toxic idea in our culture that self-esteem is an inside job. Self-worth is an inside job. That is nonsense. A lie, a distortion. Self-esteem comes from a healthy attachment experience, a healthy attachment figure. And if you didn't get it in childhood, or I should more appropriately say, to the extent that you didn't get it in childhood, you have to get it later on in life. And in life, it's called an earned attachment. So sit with a therapist who doesn't want to fix you. Sit with a therapist who's more interested in finding you and understanding you than fixing you. Sit with a therapist or a mentor or a sponsor who's not anxious to help you get past it, but rather somebody who's willing to sit with you in it. Stop hanging around people who think they know what you should do, that has the bandwidth to kind of sit with you as you struggle. You know, Jamie Gill, my therapist, sat with me for, in some cases, years and years and years with problems that had a seemingly simple answer, simple solution. It's remarkable that she was that patient and loving. I often describe it as the door was 8 feet away, but I couldn't walk through it. The consequences, the fear was too great. And she sat next to me. Didn't fire me because I wasn't making progress. Didn't tell me it's time for action. You need to start doing something. Just sat with me, encouraging me, loving me. Frankly, understanding why it was terrifying for me to walk through that door. And holding that. And so now what I've learned and what I can say to you is I can sit with people because somebody sat with me, because I can sit with myself better. Not perfectly, of course, but better. So there's going to be pushback. There's going to be change back messages. There's going to be reasons why the simplest answer won't make any sense or will be too terrifying of a step to take for you. Sit with somebody who can be patient and loving and understanding of that. Sit with somebody who's willing. I mean, most people quit therapy because they're sick of hearing themselves talk. And they're expecting or anticipating that the therapist is sick of them too. I can tell you that there is no greater gift in my life than the gift of being able to sit and love somebody who's in pain and struggling and stuck. And sometimes that experience lasts for years. Sitting with them and loving them lasts for years. And I'm not inclined to tell people what the right thing is. So what I would say to you is find somebody. Find somebody who can see you. Find somebody who can give you a sense that you're safe. So when your children tell you that you're crazy, that you're ridiculous, that you're listening to psychobabble, that you're full of it, that you're stupid, that you're old-fashioned, pick the insult. It won't get in you because you've taken care of yourself somewhere else. And then you'll hear all of those insults, those names that they call you, those psychological manipulations. You'll hear them for what they are, which is somebody who's in distress and desperate, somebody who's confused. I wrote something the other day, and I think it was maybe too nebulous of a quote because there was some misunderstanding, but I wrote and said, taking people at face value is a sign and evidence of healing. In other words, as we grow, we don't try to talk people into our way of thinking. As I've matured and people tell me that I'm a nut, I'm more capable today than I was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago of saying, I see your point. I do struggle. It's got to be hard to live with me. I get it. Sorry about that. Genuinely, sincerely, because I feel better. My parent education has transformed so much in the past 15 years. I started doing these broadcasts. It'll be in about a month, one day less than a month. It will be 14 years. I remember the day because it was the day my daughter was born, my first broadcast. And I moved away from skills and tools and suggestions and answers to what I'm doing with you tonight. Talking about the way that I think, the way that I've learned to think, the way that I've learned to be. When you're at peace, it doesn't matter what they say to you. And I say that like it's like it's easy. And it's not. It's your life's work. It's my life's work. It's our life's work. But the beautiful thing about making our life's work the focus is that when you change the project from fixing the child to fixing yourself, the child is relieved and unburdened. And you're right. When you set new boundaries, everybody that's operating in that old consciousness is going to fight against you. You're not going to be celebrated. You're going to be told what a horrible, rotten mother, father, brother, sister, friend you are. But because you're building up a stronger sense of yourself, you won't be pushed off the ground that you're standing on. You won't be as susceptible to peer pressure. Really, what you're describing, it'll sound funny, but you're describing peer pressure. I love this quote I saw the other day. It said, I went from being a parent pleaser to being a people pleaser to being a child pleaser. That's, in a nutshell, that's the evolution of attachment trauma. If it was our job to make our parents happy and proud, then it's our job to make our friends happy and like us. And then later on, it becomes our job to make our children like us. And then they have to give up who they are to support our ego that we never developed because nobody knew how to do it. So that's the oversimplified growth curve, learning curve. All right, I'm going to wrap it up for this evening. Thanks for your indulgence. I don't know if this was a helpful broadcast or topic. It's a little bit different than the ones that I've done in the past, but like I said, the subject we had planned, we're postponing. My books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be, are available on Amazon and Audible. Next support group will be November 24th for wilderness families. And we have an intensive support group on December 14th. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com or go to our website to register and find the schedule. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, we have Finding You intensives every month. December 8th through 12th, January 12th through 16th are the next two. December might be full. If it's not full, it's really close. And then we also do it online for people that can't make it. It's also much more affordable online, and it's broken up into 2 parts. So this is part 1, January 28th through 30th. If you want to do an adventure experience with your family, we have a pursuits trip for families and young adults. Think Sober Fun. You can use that as a way to kind of reconnect to your therapeutic work, have some fun, maybe in between programs, after programming, or just to revisit it. We also have online coaching, virtual coaching for anyone who wants it with our attachment-based trained therapists. So just contact coaching@evoketherapy.com if you would like a coach to help you do this work week to week. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Adult Children, Refuge Recovery, or NAMI.org. And you can follow us on social media. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy. On Instagram, you can also find our intensives program by using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching either Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has new content each week, beautifully, wonderfully cared for and curated by our moderator, Malia Boyd, this evening. So thank you, Malia. My next broadcast will be December 8th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. It'll be a live Q&A. So if there's some leftover stuff that you want to ask about, if you want to bring your family and friends to that, if you have a sibling of a child in treatment, you're welcome to invite them or ask a question on their behalf. I hope you have a safe holiday. I hope you're in a place where you're welcomed. And again, whatever you decide to do this week, you have my therapeutic permission to do what you need to do to take care of yourselves. Take care, folks. Thanks for joining us. Thank you on behalf of the people that love you for the work that you're willing to do to look at yourself. Have a great evening and talk to you next week. Bye-bye.